Have you seen the price of a Porsche 911 GT3? Oh no, not that. That's the MSRP. That's not the real price. This is. And that is the price you pay only if a Porsche dealership deems you worthy enough to buy one. So it's pretty safe to say you and I will never own a brand new GT3. And don't even get me started on the used market. The Porsche 911 GT3 used to be a car made by drivers for drivers, but now it's a car made by drivers for influencers. And it's not totally Porsche's fault, it's kinda ours. The 911 GT3 might be your dream car, or maybe you think it's just another expensive supercar, but its journey from track toy to financial asset represents a much bigger shift in car culture as a whole. A shift that has me questioning whether or not cars are even for car people anymore. But before we can answer that philosophical question, we gotta start with what the heck the GT3 even means. Initially, it meant lineage, Metzger engines, Le Mans trophies, racing pedigree. But now it's a car ordered in $16,000 paint-to-sample Brewster green with $10,000 ceramic brakes and $7,000 carbon bucket seats that give you sciatica on the way to Cars and Coffee. A car driven twice a month and photographed 10 times as often. A car that will go on Bring a Trailer more times than it will on a track day. Which is ironic, because for Porsche themselves, motorsports isn't just entertainment or marketing, it's one of their core values. Racing is where the greatest engineering minds at Porsche have their ideas tested, where their failures teach them lessons. And when Porsche developed the 996 GT3 back in 1999, it wasn't to get rich, it was because they had to. Their racing program demanded it. Going back in time, Porsche had plenty of high-performance models in the air-cooled era, the 911 RS cars, the 993 GT2, but when the new water-cooled 996 was in development in the mid-90s, they had to go back to the drawing board, not just for the production model, but for the race cars too. Of course, there was one little snag. Porsche was dead broke in the 90s, and they were dumping all the R&D budget they had into the new Boxster and 996 911 in an effort to save the company. And if they could barely afford to make the base car, then they certainly weren't going to spend any coin on a faster version for racing. But Porsche's motorsports team lead, Hartmut Christen, managed to convince the board to set aside some money to develop a GT3/GT2 homologation car, with the expectation to sell a few of them to the public, the hardcore buyers, and keep the racing program alive. And this is where most bean counters at any other company would tell Mr. Christen to get lost. But this was Porsche, and they always had a soft spot for racing. So they threw some cash his way, and with a little bit of money, Christen and his team built something that nobody thought they could. They took the engine straight out of the Porsche 962 race car, the Metzger-designed Flat 6, and modified it with water-cooled cylinder heads. Also, they could slap it into a hotted-up version of the new 996 generation 911. It made 335 horsepower, bigger brakes, new suspension, lightweight wheels, proper aero, and boy, was it quick, being the first production sports car to ever lap the Nürburgring in under 8 minutes. They called it the 911 GT3, and it was the ultimate version of the Porsche 911. Sticker price was ultimate as well at $76,500, just under $150K in today's money, so it was pretty pricey. And the expectations from the board were that they would hardly sell them. The idea that there were enough track enthusiasts out there to buy up these homologation 911s was insane to them, but they were proven wrong. Really wrong. Owners of these GT3s really used them. It wasn't uncommon to see a 911 GT3 at a track day in the early 2000s being beaten within an inch of its life. And that initial idea of the 996 GT3 might seem like a simple idea now, but for Porsche in 1999, it was kind of revolutionary. And more importantly, it set the precedent for all GT cars going forward. Of course, if you're a fan of fast Porsches, you should check out the build threads on the Albon Discord, like Fez's 996 Turbo, which you can find at the link below the subscribe button. And as for Porsche's racing program, the real reason they wanted to make this car in the first place, well, variants of the 996 GT3 took class wins at the 24-hour Le Mans in 99 and 2000. It won the British GT Championship, and tons of cutting-edge engineering developments in suspension and braking were tested and proven on 911 GT3. And all of that led to the expansion of Porsche's GT department, which led to the development of the 996.2 GT3, the next generation, the GT2, and then the legendary Andy Preuninger came in and led the charge in scaling up the GT program. Now, I'm skipping over a lot of stuff here, but I want you guys to understand how the Porsche GT came to be. And of course, in addition to GT, was RS. The RS badge was brought back in 2003 with the GT3 RS, which took the simple formula of the GT3 and turned it up even further. New heads making over 400 horsepower, carbon ceramic brakes, more aero, better suspension, and Porsche enthusiasts with the spare dough ate it up. The racier, the better in their eyes. And by the end of the 996 production in 2005, they had sold nearly 6,500 GT models. Which, to be fair, wasn't even 4% of the total 996 911 sales, but it was far more than they ever thought they could sell. And that was the thing. These cars were built for a purpose. Too hardcore for somebody who truly didn't care about the racing pedigree, too focused for somebody who didn't want to be on a racetrack. Not to say that every single GT3 owner was a track rat, but the culture of the GT3 back then was starkly different than it is now. Of course, if you told a GT3 owner today, why don't they take their car to the track, they'd probably just laugh and mutter something about bring your trailer value comps, but we'll get to that in a little bit. First, we have to talk about the greatest GT3s ever made. The 997 GT3s. The GT3 for a true car enthusiast. An enthusiast like Bob here. This is Bob. Bob is a mechanic currently looking for his 10 mil socket.
Ah, yes. The old 10 mil.
And well, Bob isn't a lucky man, and maybe not a great mechanic either, but Bob is an honest worker. An honest worker that finds himself working at some less than safe shops.
Oh, not again!
But thankfully, when workplace negligence leaves Bob injured, he knows he can call Morgan & Morgan. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm, and it's never been easier to pick up your phone and get in touch with one of their excellent lawyers to fight your case. But Bob is a regular, hardworking American like you or me, and can't afford expensive upfront legal fees. Well, with Morgan & Morgan, the fee is free unless you win. All Bob needs to do is get in touch with one of the over 1,000 lawyers at Morgan & Morgan and get the compensation he deserves. So if you've been a victim in a car accident, medical malpractice, workplace injury, or any other personal injury, you can hit the link in the description to get Morgan & Morgan to fight for you. Bob did, and he's happy Morgan & Morgan had his back and his butt. The next generation 997 Porsche 911 was the perfect successor to the 996. It debuted in 2004 and it was more refined, more modern, but still small, lightweight, and supremely connected. The 997 GT3 was released in 06 and it had all the goodies we'd come to expect. A 3.6-liter Metzger flat 6 making 409 horsepower with an 8,400 RPM redline, double the downforce thanks to new aero, and a track-oriented version of Porsche's PASM active suspension. And all that with a curb weight of just 3,075 pounds. Remember when sports cars were lightweight? Yeah. BMW doesn't. Alongside it was the GT3 RS with another 44 pounds of weight reduction, a wide body, and a wider track width. And a few years later in 07 came the 997 GT2. Now this was the craziest one yet, using the 911 Turbo's 3.6 liter with new variable geometry turbos to push out 523 horsepower and 502 pound-feet. And it had new aero, a titanium exhaust, and the boys from Motor Trend got it from 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds. 3.3 seconds in 2007. And it was around this point in time, that the 911 GT3 kind of became a thing. In racing, the GT3 Cup and GT3 RSR were class-leading race cars with plenty of championship wins and podium finishes, with the late great Sabine Schmitz even setting a naturally aspirated lap record on the Nürburgring in a GT3 RSR. Now, they weren't a cultural phenomenon like they are now, but people, certainly car people, knew about the 911 GT3. Richard Hammond had a couple, Jerry Seinfeld had more than a couple, but even though they may have been celebrities, they were still hardcore car guys, so it made sense. The general rich public, well, they were still buying Astons, Ferrari 575s, and 430s, Gallardos and Murciélagos. You know, cool cars. I'll let Jeremy Clarkson explain.
You see, there are two types of petrol heads. You've got idiots like this who like the Porsche 911, and you've got people like me who'd rather have anthrax than a 911 because I'm a Ferrari person.
And it wasn't just Clarkson that thought that. The sales numbers were proof. Throughout the 997 generation, Porsche sold just over 8,300 GT cars, an improvement over the 996, but still just a drop in the bucket, especially compared to its competitors. And while I'm sure the '08 financial crisis played a part in that, even Lamborghini managed to sell 14,000 Gallardos in its lifetime. Of course, slow sales didn't stop Porsche from continuing to make absolute weapons. In 2009, the 997.2 was released and the GT3 got a new 3.8-liter engine with forged pistons, lightweight valves, hollow camshaft, and that thing revved like it was filled with helium and put out an astonishing 430 horsepower. Add to that new aero and active dynamic engine mounts, and you had the sickest 911 yet, which happens to be my favorite ever 911, the best balance between modern and old school, a car that you could absolutely live with while not compromising on hydraulic steering, a simple engine, no automatic transmission. It is the final GT3 that, in my opinion, was truly pure in its motorsports mission. And before this generation was sent off for good, we got both the GT3 RS and the legendary GT2 RS, one of the most insane cars that Porsche ever built. And then, in 2011, as a final swan song for the 997, the GT Boys released the GT3 RS 4.0. With a stroked out 4-liter flat six making 493 horsepower and 339 pound-feet, it was one of the most powerful 6-cylinder NA engines ever, making 123 horsepower per liter. And well, the chassis on that RS 4.0 had more in common with the GT2 RS than the GT3, weighing just 2,998 pounds, always feeling like it was on its toes ready to attack a corner. Truly a grail when it comes to driver's cars, maybe one of the greatest driver's cars of all time. And then they should have stopped there because, well, things kind of fell apart for the GT3. The 991 Generation 911 was released in 2012, and it was a big departure from the 997. It was a total redesign, well, as much of a redesign as you can get for a 911, being a noticeably larger car with more of a focus on comfort and refinement. The goal of the 991 was to be more broadly appealing than 911s of old, and the GT3 of this generation was proof, because for the first time ever, the manual transmission was gone. Porsche's new PDK was the new hotness, and it was the only option available. And the trusty Metzger engine was gone too. In its place, the evolution of the base Carrera's 9A1 direct-injected flat six. This thing was plenty powerful, 469 horsepower and 8,250 RPM redline, and in combination with that lightning-fast dual-clutch transmission, it was a real performer. But it was here that something interesting happened. The Porsche 911 started to become cool, but not cool like it used to be. Now it was becoming cool. Cool? No? Okay, let me explain. Porsche had spent nearly the last 2 decades reimagining their brand, from a niche sports car maker to a luxury brand. And I don't mean like Audi luxury brand, I mean like Louis Vuitton, a generational luxury brand, one that set the standard for luxury beyond just being a car. And Porsche's range of cars was a good reflection of this new marketing effort. The Cayenne, the Panamera, the all-new Macan, they were family cars to appeal more mass market, yes, but they were also entry points into becoming part of the Porsche club. These cars were everywhere, on social media, at fancy events, on your TV, all telling you one thing: to own a Porsche is to own something more premium than the rest. The red and yellow crest on the nose of your car became as important as the 2 letters on your handbag. And so, when this new 911 GT3 came out and was far more accessible with its practical interior and easy automatic gearbox, people who never cared to own a race car suddenly were infatuated with Porsche's race car for the road. Not because they wanted to drive it, but because they wanted to wear it. And GT3 sales blew up. The previous gen 997.2 GT3 sold a little over 2,200 cars in its production run. The new 991, over 6,500, nearly triple the amount. And it seemed, slowly but surely, that the Porsche pendulum started swinging in a new direction. No longer was the buyer of the GT3 just the motorsports crazed doctor or the weekend track day CEO. Now it was the pro sports players, the streamers, the dropshippers, the PPP loan and crypto scammers. And right when it seemed like Porsche was undergoing a seismic shift internally of who Porsche enthusiasts were, the engines started failing. At first, it was just a couple, but this was the 911 GT3, and for years they had a reputation of being the reliable supercar. So even just one car throwing a rod out the side of the block was newsworthy stuff. But it wasn't just one. There were numerous reports of engine failures and subsequent fires, and so Porsche had to get ahead of this as quickly as possible. They investigated their production line and found that the supplier of the rod bolts had a production issue and the bolts themselves weren't up to quality standards. So when these weak rod bolts were subjected to 8,200 RPM of flat six fury, well, they decided to let the rod go on vacation. Now, this was only about a year into production, so all 785 GT3s that had been produced were recalled and fitted with new, updated engines. And as a token of goodwill, all owners were given an extra year of warranty for some peace of mind. It wasn't a cheap solution, but Porsche had caught it early, and so it seemed like they were still in the green. And then the engines started failing again. But this time, it was 4 years later, at the end of the 991.1 generation's production run. It turns out there was an issue with the valve rocker arms. Those also had some quality issues, and you guessed it, were sending engines to the little junkyard in the sky. And so Porsche had to offer every single 991.1 GT3 owner a 10-year, 120,000 mile extended warranty on the engine. You can't even get that type of warranty on a Hyundai anymore, and this was a 911 GT3. Now, granted, the warranty was specific to the valve train failure issue, but nevertheless, it was a hugely expensive mistake for Porsche, and one that caused some serious reputational damage for the Porsche enthusiasts who not only didn't appreciate the 991's step away from driver involvement, but also were starting to lose trust in Porsche engineering. But you know who didn't care about any of that? Influencers, automotive hype beasts, the Novo rich who wanted the hottest car not to lap in, but to stunt in. And so that pendulum of buyers I mentioned earlier started to shift even further in the other direction. Porsche was becoming the automotive trendsetter. Porsche was becoming Ferrari, and that was in more ways than one. You see, with the newfound popularity of the GT3, Porsche found themselves in a new position when they released their special editions like the GT3 RS. Released in 2015, it had an all-new 4-liter engine making 490 horsepower and was regrettably still PDK only, but despite that, it was still an absolute rocket, and thanks to the new wide body and new aero, it looked the absolute business too. And as you can imagine, the doors of the dealership were being knocked down by all the buyers who wanted to get into one. But Porsche didn't have the capacity to make that many GT3 RSs. These were supposed to be the special version of an already special car. And so dealerships had to start waitlisting potential customers by the dozen, all while begging Porsche corporate to make some more of these money printer GT3 RSs, please. And some dealers, well, they decided to create a new system entirely to manage orders. No longer was it first come, first serve. Now it was,
you scratch our backs, we'll scratch yours.
Well, Jules, the funny thing about my back is that it's located on my...
Some dealerships were now charging customers markups of $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 just to get the opportunity to buy a GT3 RS. All while other dealerships organized their customers by how much business they had previously given the dealership. If you bought a Cayenne for your wife, a Macan for your kid, a Turbo S for yourself, maybe a second Cayenne for the mistress, and then promised to sell those cars back to the dealership for less than market value, then maybe they'd consider you for a new GT3 RS. It was the Ferrari playbook through and through, a brand that for decades had been all about creating an in club where you had to pay to play by buying 3 or 4 cars you didn't like before you got the chance to buy the car that you did like. How else do you think Ferrari managed to sell a car as dreadful as the California? For Porsche though, this was uncharted territory. And if they had pulled this stunt back in 2008, when the average GT3 customer was a little bit more discerning, they probably wouldn't have gotten away with it. But now, well now, the average customer was ready to sign a purchase agreement blindfolded if they had to. And so, Porsche sold GT3 RSs by the boatload. 4,520 of them throughout the life of that generation, which was more than twice as many as any previous RS before it. And Porsche was raking in the cash, all while their special car started to feel a little bit less special. And for some people, that wasn't gonna fly. Porsche purists still sent demands to old Andy Poininger that they wanted a manual transmission GT car. It was heritage after all. But manufacturers like Porsche were adamant that the world was moving away from the manual, and so a standard 911 Carrera was your only option if you wanted to roast some gears, until 2016, when the GT team decided to build a little something special for themselves, a sort of driver's special 911, the 911R. This was a GT3 RS, but with no wing, no fancy aero. It was 110 pounds lighter, and it had, yes, a manual transmission. 500 horsepower manual lightweight 911, sign me up, said basically everyone, except only 991 of these bad boys were made, and as you can imagine, sold out immediately. I shudder to think what the markups were on these cars or what horrible rituals buyers had to participate in to get them, but if you had more than the $186,000 MSRP to spend on this car, then I guess I can't feel that bad. But see, here's the thing. The 911R may have been wonderful, but it was the start of one of the worst things ever to happen to the Porsche 911. It became a flipper's market. 911Rs were immediately relisted for $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. And if you were hot for one but didn't buy 18 Macans at your local dealership in the last year, then your only option was to pay 3 or 4 times the asking price. And this rising tide of second-hand 911s rose prices across the board for basically all hard-to-get 911s, all while sinking the dreams of a lot of Porsche enthusiasts. GT3s and RSs started to sell for over sticker price in the second-hand market. New cars were cheaper than used cars. It was all bass backwards in Porsche land. And well, the suits at Porsche HQ saw this and thought, "Wir werden so reich sein." Porsche dealerships were realizing that they could sell a special edition 911 for any price they wanted. So a 6-figure dealer markup became a normal way to do business. And considering that 911Rs would eventually sell for over $1 million in the secondhand market, what was an extra $100,000 or $200,000 at the dealership? And even when they came out with a car that wasn't selling particularly well, like the 918 Spider hypercar, they gave buyers the extra incentive of being on top of the list when the next special 911 came out, which was basically insider trading for the wealth of Porsche enthusiasts, so why wouldn't they take that deal? They love insider trading. Now, I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying Porsche was scamming anyone. They were making genuinely fantastic cars and we're just enjoying the fruits of the free market. It's capitalism, baby. Well, actually, except for the time that they were actually scamming people. This was in 2018, after the facelift 991.2 GT3 had come out and, by the way, was given a manual option. Sorry, 911R buyers. Champions, Florida, in Porsche was selling GT3s left, right, and center, and their VP of marketing, Shiraz Sukrali, was in charge of collecting the huge deposits that GT3 buyers had to put down just to get on the list. Of course, it turned out those deposits weren't going towards their 911, it was going towards Shiraz's new yacht. Turns out, this dude had been pulling this scam for years and had collected $2.5 million before disappearing, presumably in his own GT3, and leaving all of those customers high and dry. Now, luckily, he was caught in 2019, but the fact that the GT3 buying process was so driven by greed made it a breeding ground for this type of nefarious behavior. Thankfully, it didn't happen again, right? Yeah. In 2024, just last year, a Porsche salesman in South Carolina was sued by his own dealership for allegedly taking under-the-table bribes from customers in order to bump them up on the wait list. And he had been doing this for years, allegedly, amassing hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes. Also, some dude could just get his GT3 pictures up on his Instagram a couple months faster than the other guy. From top to bottom, from the dealership practices to the scummy scammers, all of it gives me the ick. Be it buying 3 Taycans just to get on a list for a GT3 or having to buy a couple Porsche brand watches with every purchase to stay in a dealer's good graces, it's all scummy behavior that kind of ruins the joy of potentially buying your dream car. But here's the thing, nobody's being forced to do this. The market will bear whatever it can bear, and if Porsche buyers are happy to jump through these hoops to buy these cars, then I guess more power to them. And if those same buyers want to squirrel these cars away in their garage so that they can get twice their money on Bring a Trailer a few months later, then so be that too. But if you're an engineer at Porsche and you spend every waking moment thinking about how to design the perfect Heim joint that'll minimize deflection on a control arm as it's hitting the curbing on T3 at Road America, then doesn't it make you just a little bit sad when the only curbing your creation will hit is the one in the Erewhon parking lot? Andy Preuninger and his team have continued to make truly excellent cars. The 991.2 GT3 and RS, the insane 700 horsepower GT2 RS in 2017, the 911 Speedster, the 992 GT3, the RS, the Dakar, the ST, and now the all-new 992.2, not to mention the race cars, the 911 RSR, the GT3 Cup, racing cars that continue to win trophies for Porsche all over the world. They're all remarkable cars. And car enthusiasts everywhere should be thankful that cars like these exist, especially when so many brands are making lifeless blobs covered head to toe in piano black plastic. But if you were a forum dweller in 2008 like I was, you could find renless thread after renless thread of GT3 owners talking about track alignments, lap times, recommendations to the Porsche engineers on limit handling and brake pad initial bite. Now, I'm not sure if GT3 buyers have ever been to a track if it wasn't the Paddock Club at an F1 race. And even for those who have taken their cars to the circuit, it's these curated experiences with catered lunches and instructors telling you when to brake and when to turn in and when to shift, all while you've barely eclipsed highway speeds. Cars arrive on trailers, the tires never touch public roads, the race suit is a brand new Sparko with no sweat stains. Driving events are photo ops, GoPro videos posted to YouTube without ever questioning whether they've improved as drivers. Owners will quote downforce stats they read in press kits but couldn't describe what understeer feels like. All of it just seems a little fake. And I think I can pretty confidently say that connection to motorsports, the one that started this whole GT division thing in the first place, is broken now. Now, I want to be clear, it's not everyone. There are still GT car owners that are proper enthusiasts who drive their cars like they're meant to be. Groups like Smokey's GT are awesome communities for owners of GT cars to take their cars out to amazing roads and onto proper tracks, all while raising money for charities. But they, unfortunately, are a small minority. GT3 owners don't know who drives the 911 RSR, they don't watch IMSA or WEC, the RS badge is just another checkbox on a configurator, not a tool to improve your own driving, and it's not that the heritage has vanished. Far from it. Porsche is still one of the most dominant names in racing, it's just that the heritage no longer matters. Cars like the GT3 survive now not because people need them to be fast, but because they need to be seen owning something fast. The car itself is still phenomenal, better than ever, but it lives in a vacuum. It exists for a spec sheet, for lap times that will never be attempted, for bragging rights earned not on a track, but in bidding wars on Bring a Trailer. And this shift reflects a much larger cultural change, a move away from cars as a true passion. We live in a time where curation trumps creation, where owning something meaningful matters less than broadcasting that ownership. And to me, it's kind of heartbreaking. There was a time when owning a GT3 or any car with motorsports roots, a BMW M car, a Civic Type R, connected you to a tribe of people who really cared about that history and the culture of that car, your forum family, who you spoke to about things that your actual family could never understand. And more than that, I feel as though car culture, it's lost its grit, its realness, the kind that came from bleeding knuckles, trackside repairs, 4 a.m. drives just to feel the car wake up with the world. We've lost the joy of building, of tuning, of finding out what makes a car truly great through repeated, imperfect experiences. And in its place, we have polish, curation, perfection, but perfection without purpose. Cars, at least to me, used to be the center of a culture, but now they're just accessories to a culture, a new culture that I'm realizing more and more that I am not a part of. And for a car like the 911 GT3, That change doesn't make them less impressive, but to me, it does make them less meaningful. Thanks for watching.